Hello and welcome. Today, we're diving into a concept that, let's be honest, sounds kind of scary. Ego death. But here's the thing. It's not about destruction. It's actually one of the most profound journeys of personal transformation we can take. It's about letting a false identity dissolve so that your true, authentic self can finally shine through. So, let's dive in.
And this right here, this is the paradox at the heart of it all. It seems counterintuitive, right? But we're going to spend some time unpacking exactly what it means to let go of the I we think we are, so we can finally discover the self we truly are.
So before we can even begin to talk about the death of the ego, we've got to get on the same page about what the ego actually is. You see, the ego, it's kind of like our inner guide. It's the part of us that gives our experience some structure. But, and this is the big but, that same guide, it can also be our biggest roadblock.
Okay, so first things first, it's really important to get this. The ego is not the bad guy. Psychologically speaking, it's a totally necessary tool. Think of it as your mind's manager. It's the thing that helps you make sense of the world and figure out your place in it.
So where does it all go wrong? Well, the problem comes up when that helpful ego becomes rigid. When it starts to mistake itself for our entire self, that's when it gets defensive. It starts clinging for dear life to a fixed identity, a certain job title, a specific set of beliefs. And that's when it starts building these walls between us and the rest of the world.
And this is where the psychologist Carl Jung really hits the nail on the head. He reminds us that what we think of as us, our conscious ego, that's just the tippy top of the iceberg. Beneath the surface, there's this massive, largely unexplored territory he called the unconscious.
And that brings us to the next part of this journey, the descent. Yeah, this whole process rarely kicks off while you're sitting peacefully on a meditation cushion. Nope, more often than not, it starts with a crisis, a moment where that identity we've so carefully built just doesn't work anymore.
And Jung has another powerful insight for us here. He's basically saying that all that struggle, all that pain, that's not a sign you're failing, not at all. It's the engine of growth. It's the cracking of the old shell that makes room for something new to be born.
In the old myths, they called this the descent into the underworld. For us, today, that underworld might look a lot more familiar. It could be a bout of deep depression, a period of wrestling with huge existential questions, the grief of a major loss, or that moment you have to confront the parts of yourself you've kept hidden.
So let's be really clear about something. Ego, death, it's a metaphor. It's not literal. You're not actually being wiped out. What's really dissolving is the mask, that rigid identity, that limited way of seeing yourself and the world that was holding you back.
Okay, so this leads us to the absolute turning point of the whole journey. After all that struggle, all that crisis, comes the hardest, and yet the most freeing part, surrender. It's that moment we finally stop fighting and just accept.
This simple phrase says it all. It's the fundamental shift. It's about letting go of that deep-seated need to control everything, to define and defend our experience. We move from constantly trying to manage life to simply being aware of it, just as it is.
And what's so wild is that this experience is so universal. You see it described everywhere, just with different names. In spiritual circles, they might call it awakening or enlightenment. Meanwhile, in psychology, they're talking about integration or accepting the unconscious. But at the end of the day, they're all pointing to the exact same profound shift.
And when you do that, when you finally surrender, the results are, well, they're incredible. You see, once those hard, rigid walls of the ego start to soften, you naturally find a deeper sense of humility, a real, profound peace, and a natural empathy for other people. Because that illusion of being separate just starts to melt away.
So, what happens next? After the surrender, what's left? Well, this isn't about just floating off into the clouds and leaving the world behind. No, it's about coming back to it, but with a completely new and expanded way of seeing everything. This is the rebirth. The great mythologist Joseph Campbell had this beautiful way of describing this part of the story. He called it the hero's return. The idea is that after you've gone through the underworld and survived, you don't come back empty-handed. You come back with what he called the elixir, some new wisdom or insight to share with your community.
Psychologically, there's a name for this whole process: individuation. It's really just the process of becoming a whole, complete person. First, you come back to your normal life, but you see it with totally new eyes. Then, you start to weave this deeper awareness into everything you do.
And the result? You start living with this powerful, unshakable authenticity.
So the end goal here, the new foundation you're building on, is wholeness. You become one, cohesive whole. It's where the conscious you and the unconscious you, they're not fighting anymore. They're working together, and that creates a much more stable foundation for your life.
All right, let's zoom out for a second, because this whole journey, this isn't some new agey fad or some niche psychological idea. It's a fundamental human pattern. It's a story that has been described by cultures all over the globe, going back thousands of years.
I mean, just look at how this one core truth shows up in so many different languages. Whether you're talking about the hero's descent and rebirth in ancient myths, the Buddhist idea of non-self, the Christian story of crucifixion and resurrection, or modern psychology's model of individuation, they're all just different ways of describing the same fundamental journey.
So maybe the best way to reframe this whole thing is to see that ego death isn't really an ending or a final destination. It's more like consciously joining in with the natural rhythm of life itself, that constant ongoing cycle of death and renewal that makes all new growth possible.
And all of this leaves us with one last question. And this one, well, this one's just for you. When you look at your own life, your own identity, what you believe, what's the one illusion, the one mask that you might be ready to let go of?